Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Conduct Dismissal Masterclass. Just checking that everyone can hear me and see me all right. If we can get a couple of thumbs ups in the chat, just so I know I'm not speaking out into the ether, that would be great. Perfect. So we're going to get started. We've got a lot to cover today. This is the first session of our new masterclass series where we are looking at dismissal. So today we're looking at conduct dismissals. The next session is capability, and then what's going to follow is redundancy, SOSR, and statutory dismissals. And then we're also going to do a special session on retention and onboarding. So look at the other side of how we can keep our best people and ensure that we are getting the most out of our recruitment and onboarding processes. So today we're going to get into conduct in some really good detail. So hopefully you can leave this session feeling a little bit more confident about what you may need to do if a situation where you have got conduct issues within your workplace that need to be addressed in a formal environment. So for anyone who hasn't been on these sessions before, my name is Alyssa. I'm the founder and MD of Heroes. We are an employment consultancy, SaaS platform and e-learning provider. So my background, I am an employment law solicitor. I spent over 10 years working in private practice and on my feet in tribunals. So there's not a lot that I haven't seen day to day. And now I spend my days helping SME businesses, HR professionals, and anyone with an interest really in employment law and HR when it comes to their day to day at work. So we're going to be looking at the process that we need to follow for conduct dismissals and also have a look at the mistakes that are actually costing employers thousands and how to avoid them. So the cost of getting it wrong, real cases, real costs. This is something that could happen to your business. We're not actually in the business of trading on fear like some of the other much larger providers, but we cannot avoid the reality these days, which is that tribunal awards are going up and up and up. We see that the ceilings for compensation awards get raised every year. For unfair dismissal, obviously, we are seeing that 2-year limit coming down to 6 months in 2017, and the limits on those compensation caps are being lifted. And also lawyers are getting more and more expensive. The days from when I was an NQ and hourly rates for like 150, 200 pound an hour, those days are long gone. You can end up paying someone 400, 500, 600 pounds an hour to protect you when it comes to tribunals. So the best thing we can do to try and preserve your bottom line and stop you hemorrhaging costs when it comes to defending a tribunal in a situation where you're probably not going to get your costs back is to try and avoid it happening in the first place. We've got some figures on screen. We've got a case where £44,000 was awarded in a case where an investigator never interviewed the complainant, which fatally undermined reasonable belief. So we're going to come on to all the stuff around reasonable belief in a moment. Just under £8,500 where a disciplinary policy was described by a tribunal as Orwellian. We've got this statistic here where 42% of unfair dismissal claims, so nearly half, were won on procedural grounds and not actually on necessarily the merits of the claim. So 42%, so nearly half of tribunals which are in this situation by errors that could have been avoided. So we've got a quick poll to get us started. So how confident are you that your current dismissal process would stand up to a tribunal? So very confident, we've got about 33% in there, somewhat confident, but there are some grey areas, not very confident, we've got gaps, not confident at all, we'd likely lose. Well, I'm glad no one's down in that bottom category. But yeah, somewhat confident. I'd say most of our clients actually probably fall within there, that they know we've got these procedures, that we know that actually what we've got written down is really good, but sometimes getting our managers to follow them in the way that they should be followed can be difficult, but also remembering that there's someone on the other side of a table of a disciplinary and people are unpredictable. So dealing with difficult people going through a conduct process can be sometimes what derails that process and can land us in hot water. So as I've briefly touched on, the rules are changing. So we need to be ready for January 2027 when the qualifying period is going to reduce from 2 years to 6 months. So every dismissal that you handle from next year carries significantly more legal exposure. And there's going to be far more employees that are going to be qualifying from day one because we've got additional protections within other parts of the Employment Rights Act. The compensation cap is being lifted. So that ceiling of 118,000, which I've seen a lot of fear mongering around this. How many cases have we seen, or headline cases where actually that ceiling, that cap has been awarded? they're relatively few and far between. But where this is going to hit us is with our high earners. So where we have to perhaps remove someone who is in C-suite or someone at director level, or those real high earners, where we had the comfort that they would only be awarded up to a maximum of a year's losses. With that now gone, it does mean that for those minority of dismissals, actually that risk is a lot higher. And then also the time limit to bring a claim is being increased from 3 to 6 months. So for anyone who has had, that horrible day when the brown envelope arrives from the employment tribunal with the claim, and you think, God, this was ages ago. Like, what is this doing on my desk at this point? But at the moment, employees have got 3 months from the day they're dismissed to open with ACAS. ACAS can then run for what used to be 4 weeks. It was then extended to 6. It's now 12. They then send their claim form off to the tribunal, and that could sit on the tribunal's desk for several weeks getting processed before the claim actually arrives with you. So even under the 3-month limit, you could be looking at sometimes 6-9 months before that claim landed on your desk, by which time memories have faded. That's going to get even worse, because now with that 6-month time limit, the reality is, with how busy the tribunals are and how overloaded ACAS is, you could be looking at 9 months, a year before you receive a claim form in respect of a dismissal. That January date is fast approaching, and remember that anyone employed from the 1st of July this year, if they are still employed by January 2027, will have the benefit of that protection. So it's not people starting from that standing point on the 1st of January next year. It will kick in for anyone who has 6 months service at that point. So that's why we're looking at dismissals, because we've got this new regime coming where actually the risk is going to be increasing, it's going to get more expensive, and it's going to take up more management time. So we need to make sure that we are doing this right. So how exposed is your business right now? So have a moment to think where your organization currently stands, and try and be honest, because the rest of this session will be more valuable to you if you know where your blind spots are. If you think my processes are fantastic, my managers all know what we're doing, we've got absolutely no risk, the reality is that actually your risk profile is higher, because you're not quite so awake to what's going to happen, because you're not looking for problems within your own procedures. You think you're far too comfortable. So being really, really honest about where you think your potential blind spots and exposure is going to help you in terms of thinking, right, how do we need to develop our people? What do we need to do when we're reviewing our policies? Or when something happens, how early does HR need to be involved, and do we need to take advice? So 1, making sure we are protected, that we've got clear, up-to-date disciplinary policies and managers are trained and confident in applying them. 2, we have policies, not so confident they'd hold up under tribunal scrutiny or without direct legal challenge. 3, vulnerable, processes are fairly ad hoc. Or 4, we're at risk. So we've polled you on this already, and we've got 12% who are saying that they're feeling very, very confident, very protected. So by that, you're saying our disciplinary policy is up to date. It has been updated in the last 3 to 6 months, and it is ready for the Employment Rights Act changes. That our managers have reviewed those up-to-date policies, and we have trained them not only in applying the policies, but also in how to conduct disciplinaries, and that they are confident in how they apply them. So I'm hoping those of you that said that you were very confident, that you're happy sitting in that standard, because that is a really high threshold to meet. Yes to the question in the chat, you will get a copy of this recording. So have a think in real honesty and think, you know what? I suspect most people will fall in number 2. We've got policies, but we're not necessarily confident either that they would stand up to tribunal scrutiny, or that the people who are implementing them know what they are doing when they are coming under the scrutiny of a barrister who is going to hold them to an exceptionally high standard. So that's where we're here to help with this session. So we are going to be looking at process, the virtual test, investigations, case law, and practical scenarios. When we move on in the series, we're then going to look at capability, redundancy, SOSR, retention, onboarding. So today's agenda: what makes a conduct dismissal fair, and what gets employers caught out. We're going to look at the virtual test. If you haven't heard of that, that's the legal standard that we have to meet when it comes to a fair dismissal. We're going to look at investigation and process, and where claims are won and lost. We're going to look at some real tribunal case law and some practical scenarios to test your instincts, and then we're going to give you a checklist and next steps. So we've got lots to get through. Hopefully you'll all take something from this session, and also some nice clear reminders for the next time that you're in one of these situations. So what is a conduct dismissal? So this may sound like a really, really easy question, but actually it's a hurdle that lots of businesses fall at in the first instance. So a conduct dismissal is when we're dismissing someone because of their behavior. So something that they did or they failed to do that breaches workplace rules or acceptable standards. So it's one of the 5 potentially fair reasons. So we can dismiss people, but only for fair reasons. Those fair reasons are conduct, capability, redundancy, SOSR, and statutory reasons. Where we've got potentially, so a potentially fair reason, having a fair reason on its own is only the starting point. So once we've nailed our colours to the mast and said, this is the reason that I dismiss this person, we then need to make sure that we've acted fairly, we've acted reasonably, and we've followed fair process. So it's only the first step. Then we've got misconduct and gross misconduct. So gross misconduct is something that where we're saying it can justify summary dismissal without notice. But this can, again, it can only be where a fair process has been followed. So examples of gross misconduct, we've got dishonesty, theft or fraud, insubordination or refusal to follow reasonable management instructions. That might be repeated instructions or where it's actually significant and there's a health and safety issue at the centre of it. Violence, bullying or harassment, misuse of company property or systems, breach of health and safety rules, offensive or discriminatory behaviour. Potentially persistent lateness or unauthorized absence, where it's something that becomes really, really recurrent. Whether we dismiss for gross misconduct for that, or whether it would be recurring misconduct that takes us then to a point where we've got someone on a final warning. It could be something that actually looks like a relatively small issue, but has become chronic. It could be a reason why we dismiss. Now, disciplinary policies will often list out what is considered to be gross misconduct and what is considered to be plain old misconduct. And it's important that those lists are updated because there will be instances, and there is case law, where you have someone who is dismissed on gross misconduct charges for something that sits in another category, and the employer hasn't really applied their mind as to why this offence is more serious, and it's not been properly explained during that process. So often these lists within these policies are taken from precedents, they're taken from the internet or the companies, they're policies that have been inherited. Have a look and have a think. Within our business, are these the things that we think are the most serious? Are there other things that need to be in this list? Or actually, are there things in the gross misconduct list that don't really belong there and that don't really fit our culture, and they're things that we're more tolerant of? My view, anything around things like theft, fraud, discrimination, violence, obviously they sit in gross misconduct, but I sometimes see policies where the gross misconduct list, and I'm not kidding you, is like 3 pages long. Have a look and go through that forensically and think, does this accurately reflect where we think the line between gross misconduct and misconduct is? So then we move on to the fairness test. So we've got our potentially fair reason, which is conduct. We think somebody has done something wrong. There's something intentional in what they've done. So it's not capability. It's not that they're not up to the job. It's not something that's been necessarily, because they're too poorly to attend. So, their attendance figures have dropped down. This is something that someone has done intentionally that breaks company rules. And it's a very old case now, but the Birchill case is where we go to for the fairness test. And this is the foundational authority that every HR professional should know, whether they know the word Birchill or not. Hopefully, what we're going to talk through now is the sorts of things that should be ticking through our minds when we are talking about the fairness of a conduct dismissal. So genuine belief. Does the employer, so do you as the disciplining officer, have a genuine belief that the employee was guilty of the misconduct alleged? So the decision maker has got to personally hold this belief. They need to genuinely believe that misconduct has occurred and not necessarily relying on somebody else's assessment. So when we take that genuine belief, what a tribunal is then going to look at is, was it reasonable for that person to hold that belief? So it's not a hunch, it's not an assumption, it's not circumstantial. Was it reasonable for that decision maker to believe that that person was guilty? So that's got to be anchored in evidence that was gathered during a proper process. And then finally, that reasonable investigation. So has the employer carried out as much investigation as was reasonable in the circumstances? The standard is proportionate here. So the example we've got on screen, a global bank is expected to do more than a 5-person firm. However, a reasonable investigation is not just looking for evidence that somebody is guilty. It has to be balanced. An investigation is to look at what is this matter in the broadest possible spectrum. So look for evidence this person could be innocent and look for the evidence that they could be guilty, and we present it in an investigation report. So more often than not, reasonable investigation is a point of failure, because what we end up with is an investigator who's gone down a rabbit hole looking for evidence that somebody is guilty, and they're totally closed off to any evidence that would show to the contrary. And then we've got the range of reasonable responses test. So was the dismissal within the range of responses that was open to a reasonable employer? So what the tribunal is not doing is substituting their own view. You don't have a judge who sits there and says, well, I wouldn't have dismissed him, so therefore this is unreasonable. What they're asking is, in these circumstances, whether any reasonable employer would have dismissed. So it's a wider test than it sounds, but it does have real limits. And this is a point, again, where when we're looking at sanction, where you're going to get, if you've got me as your advisor, and someone says, we want to dismiss this person for what this reason, is we have to forensically think, is it a reasonable response to what this person has done to end their employment? Because again, this is the final hurdle where so many will fail. So the Birchall test in practice, so what limb actually means for you, what each limb actually means for you day to day. So one, we have to have genuine belief. So from your view that you formed on evidence gathered, you need to document clearly why you believe this conduct occurred. So the decision maker must personally hold and articulate that belief. And when we write that outcome letter, we need to be clear. I think you did this. I think you're guilty. And this is why. We have to explain why. What we don't do is prejudge before investigating. So we don't rely on a manager's gut feeling. We don't let someone else's opinion substitute for your own independent assessment of evidence. 2, reasonable grounds, what we do. So we base our belief on concrete evidence, so witness statements, documents, CCTV, digital records, and we weigh an employee's explanation against the evidence. So we genuinely consider whether innocent explanations stand. Now, what I often get asked is where we've got one employee who says one thing and someone who says something else. Now, we're in the employment tribunal, we're not in the criminal court, so we don't need to get beyond all reasonable doubt. It's on balance, whose evidence do we prefer? But when we're making that decision, we have to be able to say why. Why is the key. So if I am believing John over Janet, why do I believe what John said? I've got to be able to explain why I think that person is more credible. What we don't do is assume guilt from single accusations, ignore contradictory evidence, or treat allegations as proven before the hearing. So we've got to make sure that we hear that employee's response in the disciplinary and that we are then making our decision. So my response in these situations is we should not be making that decision at the meeting. We don't adjourn for 2 minutes and then go back in and go, actually, yes, we've decided you're guilty. We end the meeting, we go away and think about it, we weigh the evidence, we read the notes, and then make our decision, and we write a detailed outcome letter explaining why. Reasonable investigation do, so we interview the complainant and all relevant witnesses, we gather documents and physical evidence, and we investigate the employee's own version of events as well. So we check their account, not just the allegations. We don't skip interviewing the person who raised the complaint without evidence from the, and we don't withhold evidence from the employee. So before that disciplinary hearing, that employee has to see all of the evidence that we are going to use. We also don't withhold evidence that works in their favor. So we don't hide things that we think damage our own case. And we certainly don't conclude before hearing the employee's side of the story. We need to leave that door open for us to decide, actually, this may not be quite so straightforward. And it's the reason why when I built our HR system, and we have a disciplinary workflow that takes you through with template letters and everything that you need basically to do this fairly, is when the system gives you the ability to do your disciplinary hearing notes. So within the system, there's a section where you can during the hearing, put the minutes of the notes of the minutes in, and at the end there's a box that says, is further investigation needed? And it's this break point to think, actually, am I sure? Do we need to go back? Are there more questions that we need to ask? So that we're not just going, well, we've done the hearing, we've now got to make a decision, there's no going back, because there is always a point that we can go back before we've issued that decision. So remember, it's not whether they actually did the conduct, it's whether you had a genuine and reasonable belief based on a reasonable investigation that the person did what they were accused of. The standard is belief, not proof beyond all reasonable doubt. And it's where I often see employees falling down in tribunal, is they're so obsessed with proving the fact that they were innocent that they focus on that rather than trying to undermine the employer's reasonable belief, which is what the tribunal is going to be looking at. So let's look at a quick question to see what you all think. So an employee with 5 years clean service takes a £3.50 item from waste and eats it. What is your instinct? So this could be taking a sandwich that's been discarded at the end of a buffet or something like that. Immediate dismissal, theft is theft, full investigation before deciding, informal warning only, depends on context and past practice. So yeah, full investigation before deciding. We never instantly dismiss somebody without doing that. Depends on context. So yes, and you know what, can depend on culture as well. So there's a real life case that I hope we're gonna have time to get to, where someone was dismissed within a law firm. I think they were a contractor within a law firm, so it was a cleaner on a contract, and she ate a leftover sandwich at the end of a buffet and she was dismissed, and I think that one was settled. But the case that we always talk about when it comes to reasonableness around things like theft is one of the supermarkets where they dismissed an employee for not paying for 5p bags, and that was found to be a fair dismissal. So actually value isn't necessarily important. It depends on what's in your policies and what your culture is around things like theft and that sort of example. So back to process. The ACAS code is your fundamental roadmap. This is what the tribunal will be looking at in addition to your policies. If your policy contradicts ACAS and it lowers the standard, you are going to be getting in trouble. We can adopt ACAS and we can enhance it. We can make it better. We can make it more detailed. But what we can't do is cut corners. So every conduct dismissal must follow these 5 steps without exception. Investigate. Now, by investigate, I don't mean a 6-month forensic investigation, but we've got to, as a minimum, gather facts, interview witnesses, collect all relevant evidence, and complete that before we decide on any formal action. Notify the individual in writing, set out the allegations clearly and specifically, provide copies of evidence relied upon, and give sufficient time to prepare a proper response. Hold the hearing, so let the employee put their case fully, allow a companion, ask questions, keep it comprehensive, accurate notes throughout, and make sure that invitation letter is legally compliant. If you don't have one, we can give you a template if that would be useful for you, so you get the most up-to-date one available. Drop it in the chat and we will make sure that's circulated after the session. Decide and notify. So consider all evidence impartially, apply a proportionate sanction, confirm the outcome in writing with clear reasons, and then offer an appeal. Hopefully, this should all be imprinted on the inside of your eyelids if you're in HR. There is absolutely no excuse for why we don't follow this roadmap. Failure to follow the ACAS code can trigger a 25% uplift in tribunal compensation. And as we've said, awards from January are going to be entirely uncapped, so non-compliance could end up costing you a lot of money. So investigation, getting it right. So investigation is where most employers come unstuck, and it's where cases are won or lost. So what good looks like, so appointing a separate investigatory officer, not the person who will make the decision. Interview the complainant and record their full account. Interview all relevant witnesses individually and separately. Gather documentary and physical evidence, so email, CCTV, system logs. Investigate the employee's own version, so we're checking alibis and explanations. Produce a written investigation report with clear findings, and disclose all evidence to the employee before the hearing. So again, it's stuff like this in our system, which is why I've designed it the way that we did, is it absolutely handholds you through the investigation. It's got somewhere to put all your documentation. It's got a prompter to help you write your investigation report, so it's not such an overwhelming task, because these are the little things that can really make a difference. So common failures that can cost money. So never interviewing the complainant, withholding evidence from an employee, failing to interview all relevant witnesses, that you've got the same person deciding the hearing who has done the investigation. Now, a quick caveat there, small employers, we can make an exception here, but we've got to be really, really, really clear why we don't have the resources and why we were forced into a situation where the same person had to do it. So it's not an absolute critical failure if you're a tiny employer, but we've got to be really clear on why we couldn't bring somebody else in. Reaching a conclusion before the investigation is complete. Dignity and standards training was described as woeful in one case where it was looking at disciplinary processes, and misrepresenting evidence in an investigation report. So where you've got someone who's putting spin, or they're twisting things or twisting evidence to make it look a certain way. So deciding on sanctions. So dismissal isn't always the answer, even for gross misconduct. So things that we have to consider: length of service. If someone has a long unblemished record, that counts. It's a big mitigating factor. If they've got a clean disciplinary record, actually thinking how severe is that conduct, thinking about have we got ourselves worked up into a situation where we are over-egging this a little bit. Consistency, have we not dismissed people for this in the past? Are there other mitigating circumstances, so personal difficulties, provocation, health and safety issues, workplace culture, all of which are relevant? And are there any alternative sanctions? Could a final written warning, demotion or retraining achieve the same outcome as dismissal? If not, why is dismissal necessary? Why did we feel nothing else would work and that this was so serious that only dismissal was the available sanction? So we've designed, again, and it sounds like a massive plug for the system, but it's not. It's just because of my annoyance when these things go wrong and it's easily avoidable, is we've actually built a disciplinary decider within our system that takes account of all of these things. So you make your decision, you come and check in the disciplinary decider, and it helps you kind of get a bit of a benchmark for whether you're in the right place or whether actually you're dismissed, whether your decision is a little bit high risk. So the question isn't, does the policy say this is gross misconduct, which is what I do hear some people say now and again. Well, look, it's in the policy, so we're safe. It's not. It's in these circumstances, is dismissal a proportionate response? That's what we need to be thinking. So what are tribunals looking for? Well, the mood is shifting and employers need to make sure that they are keeping pace. So we had 97,000 ET claims between 23 and 24, 13% increase year on year. We are seeing huge numbers in the backlog as well. The average unfair dismissal award, it was up 15%, so that's £13,500. And then don't forget about the 25% ACAS uplift. So we need to make sure we're tighter on process. Proportionality is being really, really scrutinized. So where someone's being dismissed for a first offence or relatively minor breaches, we are seeing tribunals come down on that. Consistency really, really matters, and policies have got to be clear. So let's have a look at some recent cases. So policy and process failures. So in Houston and Ofsted, so an Ofsted inspector brushed rainwater from a 12-year-old's head and placed a supportive hand on the child's shoulder during a school visit, and he was dismissed for gross misconduct. The Court of Appeal found the dismissal unfair, and the case has become a landmark, winning on policy gaps and evidence disclosure. So what went wrong? There was no written no-touch policy at the time of the incident in the school. No training had been provided on what physical contact was prohibited. The employee was never shown the complaint letter or the pupil's statement before dismissal, and a single non-malicious incident was treated as gross misconduct. So you can't dismiss someone for breaching a rule that doesn't exist on paper necessarily. So policies must be written, communicated, and actively trained up on, and we should always disclose evidence if it's grounds, and always disclose evidence, and withholding it is a ground for unfairness. Now, what I would say is a caveat. So if we breach someone for a rule that doesn't exist, if it is something that is so clearly extremely serious, and actually we never thought we had to write it down to tell people not to do this, then yes, potentially we can dismiss. But this is why I'm saying go back to your policies and have a look and think, is everything in there that needs to be in there? I'm going to skip through a couple of these just because we're short on time, but I'm going to point to, this one's actually one of my favorites, and I've done a YouTube video on this one. So if you want to look at this one in depth, this might be a good one to go and have a look at our YouTube channel. So this one is Langton and Buckinghamshire Fire and Rescue. So it's a recent one. So you may remember from the press, this is the fire fighter who was dismissed. He called a casualty a pig. So really kind of unpleasant situation. I don't think it was to her face, not that that makes it any better, but anyway. So in this one, we had a crew commander who made comments during a post-incident debrief saying that casualty looked haggard for her age, and he used the phrase that it's like pulling a pig. A female colleague complained, and he was dismissed for gross misconduct. Now, even though the dismissal was found to be unfair and there was a reduction for contributory conduct, there was some really key stuff that went wrong here. The investigation lacked precision. The fire service couldn't work out what he'd actually said, and they weren't really clear on what they were accusing him of. They wrongly assumed that certain statements attached to certain facts, and the case was treated as a pattern of behavior when there was no evidence that that existed, and totally irrelevant factors were taken into account when they dismissed this guy. So there were some really, really key failures, and had they got the process right, this would have been a fair dismissal. So if you want the link to the YouTube video, drop that as well in the comments and we can circulate that, because I go into about a 10-minute explanation as to what the fire service did wrong and what they could have done to make sure that that was a fair dismissal. So what would you do in this scenario? Sarah's a warehouse team leader with 5 years clean service. She's caught on CCTV taking a damaged £2.50 sandwich from the waste bin and eating it during her break. Theft and dishonesty policy list, taking company property without authorization. So we've had your answers on this one slightly further up, and we said most, I think, sat within B, full process. We do a formal investigation. We think about that virtual test and proportionality, but also we need to think about what's in our policies. Is this something that actually, if we're going to be dismissing someone for taking this out the wastebasket and we're calling it theft, well, are we explaining properly within our disciplinary policy that we have a zero tolerance policy to taking absolutely anything, like that supermarket case that I was telling you about? So another one, we have Tom, who's a sales rep with 18 months service. He accidentally sends an inappropriate meme to the company WhatsApp group instead of his personal chat. He immediately apologizes and deletes it. A colleague makes a formal complaint. Your social media policy doesn't mention personal messaging apps. A, dismiss. The content was offensive and sent to a company group. That's sufficient to justify dismissal. B, investigate. Likely warning. Investigate properly, but immediate apology. Accidental nature and policy gap suggests that first written warning is appropriate. Or C, no action. I'm going to come down here in B. The reality is this wasn't something that was done intentionally. So when we think about conduct, yes, something bad has happened, but is this someone who has gone out to work that day to do something really, really bad? No, he hasn't. So in my mind, I'd be falling into B here, thinking, well, okay, his length of service isn't that long, but we've had immediate remorse. It's not actually something that we've got a policy on. It was accidental, and it's something that we can deal with through training. So what do you think the most common reason is that people lose dismissal cases? Number one, employee didn't actually do it. Number two, process wasn't properly followed. Number three, sanction was too harsh. And number four, policy wasn't clear. So those of you who said B, process wasn't properly followed, are correct. 42% of successful unfair dismissal cases were won on process failure alone, which is why we're hammering the point in this session around the steps that you need to take and how we need to do things fairly. So your golden rules: investigate first, decide later, follow the ACAS code, consider proportionality. So is dismissal truly necessary in these circumstances? And can I explain why? Be consistent. So if we've got people where this sort of behavior before has had different consequences, we need to be able to understand why we're departing from that. Make our policies absolutely crystal clear and make sure our managers are trained on how to implement them, and document absolutely everything. We should be taking minutes in meetings. We should be retaining letters. If we have a conversation with somebody about their conduct and we're saying this is going on your file, whatever, write it down. If we get these 6 steps right consistently, you are going to give yourself a much better foundation when it comes to the day when you potentially have to defend a claim. So your conduct dismissal checklist. So before and during, make sure you've got a relevant policy identified and it's been communicated to the employee. Make sure your investigation has been carried out before formal action. Are relevant witnesses interviewed and statements recorded? Has all evidence been gathered, reviewed, and disclosed to the employee? Have we got a written notification of allegations sent in advance of the hearing? And has adequate time been given for the employee to prepare their response? At the hearing and after, if the hearing has been held with the right to be accompanied, make sure that we're not blocking that. So we can't be saying, oh no, we don't want that person, or being difficult around scheduling. We can allow rescheduling, and they're allowed at least one. Employees are given a full and genuine opportunity to respond to allegations. So we're not just telling them off at that hearing. They've got to be given the chance to respond. Mitigating factors are genuinely considered before reaching a decision. And if we're thinking that they're not relevant, that we explain why in that outcome letter. We keep coming back to that proportionality. Is dismissal the only available response? That the decision has been confirmed in writing with clear reasons provided, and the right of appeal has been offered, and we've got a different decision maker. So don't leave it to chance. Make sure your next conduct dismissal is absolutely bulletproof. We offer HR software consultancy, e-learning. So we've got all that training stuff rolled up in there as well. And we're also pleased that we're going to be able to offer, as part of our bundled offering, employers' liability insurance going forward as well. We do offer a free disciplinary process health check, where we can review your processes against our checklist and my experience. And we are always here to help if there is something that you need. So happy to take any questions. I can see a couple that have popped into the box, so we'll have a quick look at those now. Don't forget to sign up for Masterclass number 2, which is capability. This session will be available on demand, and if you need anything, please do not hesitate to get in touch. So when taking witness statements, are we allowed to disclose their names and roles? So typically default position is yes, you should be disclosing who has said what. Redaction is where either we think that if a name has been exposed, it's going to affect the fairness of the investigation, or where we think there's a very real risk that somebody should be intimidating. But starting point is we should be disclosing who has said what to give person the chance to be able to respond. Should we be getting witness permission to share their statements with the employee going through the disciplinary process? So I'd be putting this in your disciplinary policy that if you're interviewed as part of a disciplinary process, your evidence will be shared. Because if we've got a situation where we can't share a statement, we can't give that information to someone and we're going to be relying on it, there's going to be an argument that we can't use it. So yes, witnesses can feel under pressure in these situations. That is where our management approach comes in, and we should be wrapping these people up in some reassurances around that there isn't going to be any blowback for them giving evidence. But that is part of an employment process, is that statements are shared. So looking at, again, culture, making sure our policies are robust around this, and also looking after witnesses after they have given evidence to make sure they're okay after that process. If somebody doesn't agree, we can then look at redaction if we think that that statement is absolutely crucial. But again, a tribunal is going to want to really kind of look at that decision-making process and understand whether we just sort of as a tick box said, do you agree? No, okay, fine, we'll redact. That's not going to be good enough. We really need to be in a situation where someone's essentially saying that, this process is making them unwell and they're fearful for their safety before we're looking at redaction. So I think I've answered quite a lot there about witnesses. I mean, there's loads of questions on witnesses, so I wonder if maybe we could do like a little break-off session around that another time. Should a manager do the investigation, or should someone independent do the investigation and manager do the disciplinary? So there's no hard and fast rules around this. If the manager can do the investigation and do it fairly proportionately, and they're not just going to be led by their own bias of perhaps the fact that they've managed this individual and they've got a view on their behavior, it comes down to, can they be fair, can they be reasonable, and can they take any personal relationships and personal influences out of the situation? If you feel that that's going to be a risk and it's going to be accused of being unbalanced, put somebody else in. So we've talked about witnesses. So how do you respond to employees who are consistently difficult and not doing much work as a result, and feel this is deliberate bad conduct, although it doesn't fall into gross misconduct? So that's one way you could potentially have failure to follow reasonable management instructions, things around poor attitude, and you can issue warnings, so formal warnings, and when they start to stack up, ultimately you can dismiss somebody if that situation doesn't improve. Can HR investigate? Yes, HR can investigate. What you just need to make sure is that we've got some separation around making clear who is actually the decision maker, and where you've got HR who's then advising on policy later on, that they're not accused of interfering. So being very, very clear on where those roles sit. If you've got managers that are confident and they know the policies, they know how to do it, HR can investigate. Managers can then potentially do dismissal, provided they don't necessarily need in-depth HR involvement later on. If people are a bit short with boots on the ground with this kind of stuff, we can actually come in and do investigations and help with processes as well. So don't hesitate to ask if that is something that you think you need. So I think we've got to all the questions. If we have missed any, we will make sure that it goes out in the email that follows. You will get the recording. And look, I hope we see you on the next session as well. Hopefully this has been useful for you. Yeah, if you need us, there is a book and intro call. You can use that if you want to connect with us, and if there's anything that we can help you with day to day. But thank you so much. And look, we love the feedback that we get from these sessions, so I'm really, really glad that they are useful. If you wouldn't mind dropping us a Trustpilot, that would be really great, so that we know that we are doing the right things, and keep and bringing out the right sort of content for everybody as well. So thank you so much. Thank you to all the people and the familiar names that keep coming back, and we really, really appreciate it. But you are welcome now to get on with your day, and you know where we are if you have any problems. So thank you very much.